Though the New Adventures of He-Man did manage to last for 2 whole seasons, as the 90s wore on, Mattel began to realize that the series just wasn't catching a second wind, and so, after spending over a decade on store shelves, He-Man toys were finally forgotten. During the 90s, though, we had the advent of the internet, and He-Man fans began to congregate on fan sites like He-Man.org. A new string of fan products began to pop up, and pretty soon, call went out to bring the strongest man in the universe back to TV screens. And in 2002, thanks to Mike Young Productions, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe returned. The show is quite literally a remake of the Filmation cartoon, sharing the main cast of characters, the setting, and even bringing back some of the original screenwriters from the Filmation show like Larry DiTillio. The show once again focuses on He-Man's struggles against Skeletor and his Council of Evil from Snake Mountain, while He-Man still defends Castle Grayskull. However, the new show does change some things from the original. Several key characters have been drastically redesigned, and some are given completely new origins. The characters still crack jokes, but the series has a much more focused narrative, and akin to New Adventures, an ongoing storyline. It also reveals how Skeletor became the way he is, and also references many other things that the Filmation show never got around to. The show's nature changes somewhat in the second season, where, apart from Skeletor's Council of Evil, the heroes also face off against the Snake Men, Cobra Khan, and their leader, King Hiss. The show was even going to have a third season before Mattel pulled the plug on it once again because of poor toy sales. When the show aired for the first time, I think I dismissed it a bit too readily because it felt so different from the Filmation show, but on subsequent viewings, I actually find the show to be really entertaining. Admittedly, you have to be somewhat familiar with the franchise to fully enjoy it. But I'd say that if you were ever put off by the campiness and silliness of the Filmation show, then I think the new Masters will probably be more to your liking. Having said that, I still do prefer the Filmation show, and before I praise the new Masters anymore, I think I need to list some of my pet peeves with the new cartoon, just so we get that out of the way. Firstly, there's Teela. One important change made to this show was that Prince Adam and He-Man are far more physically different, and I think everyone can agree that this was a good thing. However, because Adam and Teela have always been considered something of a romantic couple, Mike Young Productions felt it was appropriate to redesign Teela as more of a teenager, and there wouldn't be anything wrong with that if she wasn't so bitchy and always talking down on Adam. On the Filmation show it was kind of endearing, but here it honestly seems like she's just being mean all the time. Secondly, there's Orko. On the Filmation show, he would regularly steal the spotlight because he's such a goofy character. In the new Masters though, Orko isn't even in most of the episodes. And when he is, he rarely gets to do anything interesting. I know the new Masters is a more serious show, but honestly, this version of Orko is just a whole lot of dead weight. If they weren't going to feature him properly, they shouldn't have bothered at all. Similarly, I hate the fact that neither Cringer nor Battlecat speaks on the show. Cringer is one of my all-time favorite characters, but now he's reduced to occasional slapstick bits and doesn't have any personality other than being cowardly. That's just a complete waste. And finally, there's Skeletor. Now, I will admit he actually does look pretty damn good, and I also like the fact that they explain his origins. However, Brian Dobson's voice performance is not very memorable. In fact, it might be the worst Skeletor I've heard so far, sounding like a really weak Alan Oppenheimer impression. Looking back at the performances by Frank Langella and Campbell Lane, while I don't think either of them were as iconic in the part as Oppenheimer, at least Langella and Lane used their own personal style while performing the character and didn't try to imitate him. Dobson just sounds weird and off most of the time, and his cackle just lacks the force of Oppenheimer's performance. That's not to say that Dobson's acting is terrible all the time. There are moments when his voice gets this weird creaky quality which is really creepy, and it's during these parts when he sounds really sinister.
And so they scatter. Who was it that said, divide and conquer? Oh, me. I have done the dividing. Now go conquer.
but it's a much weaker Skeletor than I would have hoped. Okay, but enough complaining. What about the good stuff? Well, for one, He-Man's allies and the support characters get to shine a lot. I'm actually impressed that Mike Young Productions was able to make Bozob into a pretty cool character on this show, although sadly they butchered Stratos by making him speak like a terrible Sean Connery impersonator. Mostly the main characters still look the same as the Filmation show, and that actually is pretty nice. Duncan looks a whole lot more grumpy than originally, but at the same time you could argue that a more serious warrior look suits him. There's also a lot more action content, and of course the animation is again much better than on the Filmation show. It also maintains a great atmosphere and pace, and this is probably my favorite thing about the show. It really has a suspenseful feeling about it. The series also devotes a lot more time to the relationship between Tila, Duncan, and the Sorceress, which is pretty cool since I think this was the one aspect that was never wholly explored on the Filmation show. I also like that the show introduced new villains fairly regularly and kept things fresh. I still think some of He-Man's allies like Mechanic and Cyclone were unnecessary to include, but at least the show now actually explains where they all come from. And of course, what of He-Man himself? He's voiced by one of my all-time favorite voice actors, Cam Clark, the voice of Leonardo and Liquid Snake.
By the power of Grayskull!
He's perfect as both Adam and He-Man. As Adam, he comes off as a smartass, and as He-Man, he sounds heroic and macho. And thankfully, He-Man still cracks the occasional joke, making him very memorable in the part.
Don't you know it's not polite to fight and run?
Easily my second favorite portrayal of the character after John Irwin in the Filmation cartoon. To sum things up, the new Masters is definitely worth checking out for any fans of the Filmation cartoon. It contains a lot of references back to the first cartoon adaptation of the character, but has its own fresh take, while still being very faithful to the adaptation that made the character so iconic. It's on par with me with the live-action movie and the original show. Even though I have some nitpicks about it, I still enjoy each episode tremendously, and I highly recommend it. And that's all from me for now. Until next time, I have the power, so can you.